Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the final artist conversation organized as part of the programming to complement the exhibition of the 2020 Governor General's Awards in Visual Art, currently installed at the Art Gallery of Alberta. My name is Catherine Croston, and I'm the Executive Director and Chief Curator of the AGA. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are hosting this webinar from Treaty 6 territory and Region 4 of the Métis Nation of Alberta. We acknowledge this as the traditional and ancestral home of the Nehewak, Cree, Anishinaabe, Saulteaux, Niitsitapi, Blackfoot, Nakota Sioux, Dene, and Métis peoples, and acknowledge the many Indigenous First Nations and Inuit people who make Alberta their home today. We recognize that this acknowledgement is necessary, but it's just one small recognition of the work we need to do to continue to address and reverse the ongoing impacts of colonization. The Governor General's Award in Visual and Media Arts is a Lifetime Achievement Award that recognizes an artist's career, body of work, and contribution to the visual arts, media arts, and fine craft in Canada. In 2020, 8 artists were honored for their exceptional careers and lifetime achievements. The 2020 winners are Deanna Bowen, Dana Claxton, Ruth Cuthand, Michael Fernandez, Jorge Lozano Lorca, Ken Lum, Anna Torma, and Zainab Verji. This afternoon, we are very pleased to welcome Ruth Cuthand. Ruth Cuthand is a mixed media artist of Plains Cree and Scottish ancestry, whose practice includes painting, drawing, photography, and beadwork. Born in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, she grew up in Alberta, where as a child she met artist Joe Tailfeathers, who inspired her to become an artist. Through her anti-aesthetic stance, her work challenges mainstream perspectives of colonialism and the relationships between settlers and Indigenous people in a practice marked by a delicate balance of political invective and humor. Ruth is widely considered an influential feminist artist of the Canadian prairies and is lauded for her unflinching interpretation of racism and colonialism. Her work is featured in many collections, including the National Gallery of Canada, the Art Gallery of Ontario, the Mackenzie Art Gallery, as well as the Art Gallery of Alberta. In 2013, she was recognized with the Lieutenant Governor's Award for her achievements. Ruth currently lives and works in Saskatoon. This afternoon, Ruth is in conversation with Jake Moore. Jake Moore is an intermedia artist whose primary medium is space. She works at the intersection of material, gesture, text, and vocality to make exhibitions and events and other kinds of interventions public. She has exhibited nationally. Early highlights include the Walter Phillips Gallery and La Triennale Québécoise in 2011. While Moore considers her primary medium to be space and its occupation, this idea expands the understanding of her artistic practice to include her administrative projects and other acts of building capacity as a sculptural method, one of changing the form and volume of public spaces. She is currently a PhD candidate in art history and communication studies at McGill University, as well as the director of university art galleries and collections and assistant professor in art and art history at the University of Saskatchewan. Before I turn things over to our distinguished speakers, just a few notes. Ruth and Jake will speak for about 45 minutes, following which we will answer questions. Please enter any of your questions using the chat function. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank EPCOR, who support the AGA online programming through their Heart and Soul Fund, as well as the Canada Council for the Arts for their support of the Governor General Awards and the Governor General's Awards exhibition. Please join me now in welcoming Ruth Cuthand and Jake Moore.
Hello, everyone, and welcome, Ruth. Thank you so much. Thank you, Catherine, for that kind welcome. And it's obviously we don't know who all is here, but we thank you for joining Ruth and I as well. It's always a pleasure to speak with Ruth, and really, you just have to open that can, and then she will come out, right, Ruth? Right? I'm fairly new to Treaty 6 territory, and so it's been a real pleasure to be able to share so much time and space with Ruth. And as you may know, we have an exhibition on right now at the University Art Galleries at the University of Saskatchewan, and it was guest curated by Felicia Gay. It's called Beads in the Blood. So many of the images we're going to show today are coming directly from that installation of Ruth's work. And because it is a survey show, it gives us a real opportunity to kind of cover what you've been doing for quite some time. And we might have some surprises in there, because at this point, you definitely are known as the Bead Queen, you know? Yes. And you claim that title, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, with pride and fully earned. This is not standard royalty, it's earned position. So I thought we might start with smallpox. Sorry, I'm getting a lot of feedback here. I'm not quite sure what that's from. Okay, I'll try again. Sorry about that. So Ruth, I thought we might start with smallpox, one of your earlier beaded works, simply because it seems like a standard understanding of a point of contact. When you think about what contact brought to Indigenous peoples, and this kind of shift in your work from a very anti-aesthetic to coming into things that actually on first glance appear exceptionally beautiful, but in fact are laden with overt racism, intention to harm, and a much more complicated story. Do you want to speak to this first piece?
When I started beading seriously, I was looking for something that I could put some teeth into, because I wanted to change the bead seen as this kind of crafty thing, you know, Indian arts and crafts and all the women that bead and that kind of thing. So I was looking for something that would talk about trade and contact and what happened when settlers first stepped on the shore. And so I started looking at microscopic images of diseases that were brought to the Americas and actually decimated tribes all over. And the one I think we know best is smallpox. And I started to look at these microscopic images, and oh man, they were beautiful. They were so abstract. They had beautiful colors, thanks to a person called medical artist who actually goes in and colorizes the images. And so I started beading them, and they were gorgeous. And it's like totally against everything I'd ever done before. So I was like, oh no, what am I going to do? So I had to, I knew I wanted them to look like you were peering through a microscope, right? So it's the round symbol and then the black background. And for the background, I wanted to kind of reference two things. I wanted to reference like, when you look in a microscope and then everything around it is black, it's like the void. And then I wanted to reference velvet, which Indigenous women used to bead on. They used to bead on black velvet. And so I wanted that kind of velvety kind of texture. And I wanted it to also kind of absorb light. And so the emphasis would be on these beads that shine and are so gorgeous. Then they're just too gorgeous. So I thought, okay, I gotta cut this somehow. So that's when I thought I'll put the name of the disease right onto the work. And I used a stencil. I love stencils. I just love working with them. And I thought it will also give it, you know, when well, not anymore, but they used to, you know, spray paint fragile on the sides of boxes when things were being shipped. And so I thought it looks more like it's being shipped from the old world to the new world. So I thought that would kind of cut the sweetness of it, because you look at it and you think, I mean, if the word wasn't there, we'd look at it and go, oh, wow, that's beautiful. But smallpox is staring us in the face. And so we have to kind of struggle with that push and pull between that's beautiful, no, it's not, it's dangerous, it's beautiful, it's dangerous, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think very much so, Ruth. The stencil makes a huge difference, and I think about my own family that immigrated from the Netherlands, and coming post-war, my Opa's travel box was stenciled on with his name, and all of the boxes from that family arrived here and are considered within a settler tradition to be family treasures. So it also has this implication of what is being sent to who and what are the possibilities here. You also did this fantastic job of kind of developing a framing technique of the black velvet and so the series goes on, and as you say, we all know smallpox. That's the one that's understood or regularly mythologized, but you do many more things than that. You've done many more diseases. Unfortunately, these links are consistent, but with smallpox, you also chose to work into a different kind of installation. So like in our exhibition at the gallery right now, you've got them installed like this. And I'm just going to maybe go let people see exactly what we're talking about here in these blankets and these bundles. Do you want to speak a little bit about first the bundles, and then I'd love to hear more of the story of the image behind?
Okay. I was doing research into smallpox in the blankets, and it's like that story has become told so often that it's kind of getting cliched. And so it's really hard when you're trying to think of a new way to present something. And I thought, I could actually present it as it was presented. So it was, everybody knows Jeffrey Amherst and the story. He was a British, what the heck was he? It's British General of the New World or something. And this was before the Americans separated from Britain. So they were all British soldiers that were in what is present-day United States. And he was trying to figure out how he could get rid of Indians in some way that would be quick and kind of, he wouldn't get caught. So he didn't want to go out and massacre all of them. If there was a simpler way to do it, he would be happy. So he came up with this idea that if there was a fort somewhere that had a smallpox outbreak, that the fort should be giving the blankets and the handkerchiefs from the infirmary, because they would have smallpox virus on them, and they should be giving them to Indians, and then Indians take them home. Just a minute. When I historically, I use the word Indians, and when I talk about us in present day, I use indigenous. It's just, I'm old. It's just something I do. So Fort Pitt, which is in present day Pittsburgh, two Shawnees came to the fort to tell them that Indians were starting to amass and that they were going to attack the fort. And it was like the start of what they called the Indian Wars. And so the head guy at that fort remembered what Jeffrey Amherst had said and gave them 2 blankets and a handkerchief as a gift. And they took those, and of course, smallpox spread. The interesting thing about smallpox is that it spread even before Indians had seen white people. Like it's a very dangerous disease. It spreads easily. And what's interesting is the life of the virus outside of the body can be anywhere from 14 to, some people say, 52 days if it's kept in a box. So it's virulent. It's a terrible, terrible thing. And so those Shawnee went to their camp, and then people started getting sick. So the people that weren't sick would go to the next camp, meanwhile carrying smallpox. So you have smallpox going out, and decimating Indians all over North America. It was awful. So I wanted to present these blankets as like a gift. So they have a big red bow on that's like really festive and welcoming. And if you notice, there is a beaded smallpox on each blanket. And so I wanted to have a visual reference to the virus, and to have, these actually are Canadian Armed Forces blankets. I got them through Quinn the Eskimo. He actually tracked them all down. And there's 100 blankets, and they're 2 to a bundle. And then my sister made the little handkerchief, the little light blue thing that we sewed on. I sewed onto it. And then I just piled them up. I wanted to make them like a huge pile. And when we have giveaways, things will be piled up, and then you give them away to people as gifts. And that's what I was trying to replicate.
I think people can understand this work better now than ever, given the COVID-19 scenario.
Yeah,
it finally is no longer a historical understanding. It's a lived experience for so many. And well, we know that that COVID-19 has been made unevenness in our world really clear. And particularly here in Saskatchewan, we've noticed that the threat to Indigenous peoples has been much more, and it relates to all of your work. This sort of pointing to the social parameters, the social conditions required for health, and ideas around poverty, location, living conditions, and compromised immune systems from centuries of abuse. So this gift that was given in response to a warning of attack is quite a remarkable scenario. And we saw that again here at Poundmaker, where Poundmaker was, he was awarded with a penitentiary sentence after agreeing to sign the treaty. So this kind of double bind of so-called gift giving and exchange and sort of refusal of relations is quite central to your work, and the suggestion that it is both attractive and repulsive at the same time kind of threads through always. I wanted to look again at the image behind it, because this is not common to your work traditionally. You've done images, small images, and one of the things that's been quite exciting with this exhibition is your move to the large-scale photograph, and later we're going to see a video. So I'd like you to talk about this, because we talked about, this conversation is called Making Story. And one of the things I really wanted people to become increasingly aware of is how important story is to your practice, whether it's from us sitting together and talking, while working alongside, or bringing up these stories that you so eloquently speak. And no, not everyone knows who Amherst is, and well, they should. They do not. Very few people know about the general of these territories prior to contemporary Canada. So yes, the British North American Indian Act, all of these things are historical facts that are not present for everyone. So your telling of them is really important, Ruth. No. So get to your pictures here.
Okay, so after I did the smallpox blanket, I was invited by the Dunlop Gallery to be one of the artists in their project called Roadside Attractions. And I actually, I must have had a dream, because I was trying to find a place that I could talk about smallpox and epidemic and blah, blah, blah. And I thought it was Poundmaker. And then I started doing research, and I started phoning around. I was like, what's going on? Turned out it wasn't them. But I was talking to Felicia Gay, who is a curator, friend. She told me that they had a smallpox outbreak in
Cumberland House.
Cumberland House. Thank you. And so I started doing research on it, and it was really interesting, because Cumberland House is in northern Saskatchewan, kind of close to the Manitoba border there, and they were one of the big Hudson Bay outposts. And what was interesting was they were the first ones to record an outbreak of smallpox amongst Indigenous people. And I found that really interesting because, like, obviously smallpox had come from the East, but the man who was at Cumberland House, I think they're called a factor, he was in the Orkneys, which is islands in northern Scotland. And he had been, when he was a child, there had been a smallpox outbreak in the Orkneys, and he knew the signs and he knew what had to happen. So first, this woman and boy come to the Hudson Bay post looking for help, and they say, look, our whole camp is gone. And they figured there's about 29 people in that camp, and this woman's saying there's just the two of us are left. And so he said, okay, come in. And they kind of set up a little infirmary inside the Hudson Bay post. And he knew that smallpox, most people, they actually die of starvation because they can't eat and they can't drink. And so if you can't eat and drink, you can die within a few days. And so what he did was he got his men to try and give them liquids and maybe a little bit of oatmeal, to try and keep their bodies going so they could fight it off. And then other people started arriving at the post. And so he and his men, they just shut down the post, and they had these people quarantined. And then as they died, they would dig graves and bury them. And so I wanted to go to Cumberland House and do this project there. So Felicia and I went up. Good thing I had a community member who could help break the ice a lot. And I went to the school, and I had written a little note for the parents to know that I was doing this project, and just so when their kids came home with a smallpox window cling, they wouldn't have a cow. So we went to the school, and I explained to the high school students and the elementary students what I was going to do. We put a large 18-inch across window cling of the smallpox virus right on the window of the high school in the science room, actually. And so it was supposed to be like, here's the center of your epidemic. And then I gave out window clings to the students, and they were supposed to go home and just stick them on their windows so we could see how it would spread through the community. And I was really amazed. They all get to go home for lunch, and so we had to leave by 2:00. So we went around the community around 1:00, and you'd see these little window clings in windows, and it really made my heart happy that they wanted to participate in an art project, even though it's not like standard art. And so the photograph that is behind the pile of blankets is actually from a really old graveyard, and there's a little headstone there. And so that's what that photo is, with all these pretty little flowers and a little headstone. It's not the actual smallpox area. We couldn't find it. So anyway.
But it's an important evocation of that site, and the fact that the students were able to take on things that seem so common within the digital realm, like the viral video, the ways things travel, and persistently at the start of COVID, we were being asked to send images to people so young people could know that they were being heard, etc. So this suggestion of kind of relaunching that in a very physical way is also, I think, tied to your practice, which is very, very material. Like, you are constantly making story and making this real for students in a way that they could know kind of the history of their environment. Cumberland House is we call it an island community because it's Treaty 4 just over there. It's kind of a surprise. And that connection to Hudson's Bay is a persistent one. And we're seeing that sort of amplified right now as we're getting ready for Kalmayork to open in Winnipeg. And they keep talking about the role of the Hudson's Bay Company in bringing the Inuit works. And like the first works were bought from the Hudson's Bay store across the street from the Winnipeg Art Gallery. I wanted to pick up on this project, which is a stunningly beautiful project in many ways. And it really rides the edge of that thing you say you're most, that you're always worried about, because you did begin with such an anti-aesthetic, and then you came into these glass beads, this trade work. And so it's quite complicated. But just as you were saying, within smallpox, people actually die of starvation because they're not able to eat or drink. This next series, Don't Breathe, Don't Drink, kind of touches on that persistence of keeping the most rudimentary things away from Indigenous peoples, or either limiting access to them or contaminating those accesses. So do you want to start to tell us a little bit more about Don't Eat, Don't Breathe, Don't Drink?
Yes.
Don't eat, don't drink.
I had this big idea, and it was going to be fantastic, but I didn't know how to do it. So I talked to my friend Cindy Baker, who is an artist from Alberta, because I knew she'd worked with resin, and I was asking her, like, if I did 3D beading, could we somehow put it into a glass and make it look like a glass of water? And Cindy is ever optimistic, and she's like, oh, sure, we can do that. And so I beaded these three, I think there's 6 of them, of the most common bacterium, and there's one parasite in the group that is found in Indigenous water. In those people that have don't drink, and you have to boil water advisory, or they can't use it at all. So I beaded many of them in 3D, and then Cindy and I started experimenting with resin and glasses. We were buying glasses from secondhand stores because I wanted them to have that that look that they were actually used, like there's little scratches and all kinds of things in them, because I wanted them to have that appearance of being well used, like a family does. And so Cindy was living in Lethbridge, so I'd go down to Lethbridge and we'd work in their shop in the art department, and we would put the glasses into a pressurizer so you could get all the bubbles out, and it was quite the ordeal. But anyway, we must have made, I'd say 300 glasses altogether, but I think we ended up with 100 and maybe 120, because there was so much breakage, and then there was so much bubbling and all kinds of things. It was a nightmare, I'll tell you that. But I ended up with 120 glasses, and I kept checking the numbers of how many Indian reserves had boil water advisories. And so when it was actually shown first at DC3 Projects in Edmonton, and he opened the side of the gallery, and there was this little room in there, and he's like, we're going to come in, we'll drywall it. And I'm like, no, don't drywall it, because it had this really old 70s that fake paneling they did back then. And it's like what Indigenous housing is like in areas that are further from roads. They'll just bring in, because that's so easy just to nail up that fake stuff instead of drywall, and then paint and all that stuff. So that's like what is in Indigenous housing. And I wanted that look of a really low cost disposable home. And we put a table in there, and I had made a tablecloth from blue tarp, which I had seen people in Attawapiskat trying to build homes with blue tarps to live in for the summer to get out of their unsafe homes. And I beaded black mold stalks onto that. And then at the top, we had the 94 glasses, and there were different size glasses for families, big glasses, little glasses for kids. We had a couple of baby bottles in there, just to have this visual representation of this is what's going on in Canada right now. And you should look at this. And then they, DC3 Art Projects took it to Art Toronto. They had applied for a solo booth for myself. And so we got into Art Toronto, and that was, it was pretty amazing. We were mobbed. It was like so many people would come and look at the display and talk about it. And I met a woman whose husband was building water wells for third world countries, and how they go in and train people about, water treatment and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, that's what I did.
I'm going to go through some of these stunning examples of the actual the viruses that are in them. So
yeah, that's Giardia. That's the parasite. That's the one that shut down Prince Albert.
So people can see that these are stunningly beautiful, and they fall into a realm of textile production that seems entirely outside of the issues that you're describing, these kind of impossible circumstances. And for me, these are particularly interesting when you see them against the textiles of like that, the blue tarp tablecloth you used at David's gallery in DC3. But then here, you guys very carefully sourced one of those like dollar store versions of the plastic. These are not the loving textiles from passed down for generations. This is what is available at hand within a very particular environment. And yet the careful labor and beauty is in these kind of visions of darkness. But these you don't have the names on. You didn't stencil them.
No, I've been working on after I did trading, which was the diseases that came from the old world to the new world. It was a really strange time in my career because I was thinking of that art was a really expensive hobby, and maybe it's time to shut her down. But I had this one last idea, right? And so, and what happened with that trading series was incredible because it sold, and it's like, wow. And so Steve Loft came to do a studio visit, and he said, you could have sold that series 10 times over. And he said, you should, in your next series, you should consider additions. And so we talked about that a little bit. And then I started, so after trading came reserving, which was the time when Lil Pine, which is my band, signed treaty. And that was I think it was 1878. I don't know the exact date, but so we signed Treaty 6. And then, so I was looking at a time between when we started on the reserve up to HIV, the discovery of HIV. I wanted to use that time period as reserving, talking about when we were living in crowded housing and tuberculosis and polio and all those diseases that fit into that time period. And then surviving, which is from the discovery of HIV up to the present and on into the future.
Yeah, so those markers of time that are addressing contact and then shifting away from contact or living in parallel, but that the diseases are consistent and that you can go from trading, surviving, trading, reserving, surviving, and sort of charting out what that experience has been for Indigenous peoples through illness. And then when they're shared, but still tied to ideas of pathologizing people, like we saw with the other pandemic of AIDS, HIV, that there was a pathologization of people within that moment too. I know that we are running out of time already and we're not even halfway there. So I'm going to scoot through a little bit. You always say you don't want to do this and then we start talking, but I really wanted people to hear your stories. And there's so much present here. I'm just going to touch on this very quickly because this is perhaps one of the most ubiquitous or well-known kind of stand-ins right now for Indigenous women's bodies. And it can be trivialized because of it or amplified quite poetically. But I want you to tell us when you made this, Ruth.
I think that's got to be the early 80s, maybe 83, 82 in there. Yeah. And it's called How Much Was Forgotten. And it was purchased by the Indigenous Affairs art thingy, majingy.
Yeah, it was them. Yes.
Yeah, and it was this image was used for the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Inquiry. And so they made postcards and all kinds of things with it.
Yeah, but well in advance and your conversation around forgetting or relocating these critical conversations and these critical stories, to think that this kind of very emblematic, almost flag-like, iconic kind of image, you'd already started thinking about stand-ins for women and necessary stories to be told. So that's going to bring us to this beauty. And again, I know we've talked about this a little bit, and it's such a remarkable piece. And I think it's a real, you've had these moments of change in your work from a pencil drawing practice and paintings, very much working in opposition of anything that could be overly aestheticized, often almost comic book, the way you were doing some of your early work. Yeah, and a lot of kind of collaging on of images. Like I think of Shelley Night Traveler in that one early drawing. And then coming into this work where there's it's an installation, it's a video installation with a very important video. And I'm going to ask Helen to play the video for us. Before she does, I'm just going to let people know it's 5 minutes. And I might stop it in part way through, Ruth, so we have enough time.
Yeah.
When I was a young girl, my family lived in southern Alberta. We actually lived in Cardston, and right across the highway was Blood Reserve. And Blood Reserve is the largest reserve in Canada. It's huge. It stretches all the way up to Lethbridge. I remember when my dad would take us to the north end of the reserve. And the north end of the reserve was virgin prairie. And that was used mainly for cattle grazing. And so you drive through these large areas of prairie, and then there would be like a fence gate. And my sister had just received her learner's license. So my father would stop the car and he'd go and open the gate, and then my sister would drive the car through the gate, and then he'd close it, and then he'd get back in the car and continue driving. I just remember being really happy about that, watching my sister drive the car like it was a huge accomplishment. Anyway, one Saturday he drove us up to the north end of the reserve to a secluded place where there was this wooden shack. It had a roof and it had a door, and the door was open. And inside the shack were coffins, the old-timey wooden coffins, and they were standing up. And inside the shack, and some of them, the lid had fallen off or it had shifted, and inside were skeletons. I don't remember being afraid of the skeletons because a skeleton can't hurt you. But what I was mostly entranced with was the outside of the shack. There was an iron bed that was set up outside the shack against one of the walls. And whoever had been laid out there was gone. There was no remnants of a human. There's no bones. There's no teeth. There was no mattress on this bed. Everything had just disintegrated, or animals had taken off with it, or whatever. But underneath the springs of the bed were these blue beads. And they were all, there's like a mass at the headboard of the bed. And I remember looking at those and figuring out that it was a woman who had been laid out there, and that she had been wearing a cape, a beaded cape, not the kind of cape that white people think of, but a different kind of cape. And it had disintegrated. The hide had gone, the thread, and all that was left under that bed was this mass of blue beads. And I remember thinking, that woman is gone. There's nothing left of her except for these beads. And I was totally fascinated with the idea that there can still be a mark of a woman, even though everything is gone. You can tell she was still there.
Just for the interest of time, we're going to stop there. But the piece is such a remarkable bringing together of all of your ways of working, and the pouring of those beads over the stone is so deeply poignant, particularly for our now shared territory, because the grandfathers, the stones, have been not only here for time immemorial, but have been exceptional importance to the peoples of these plains. And in Saskatchewan, the colonial borders of Saskatchewan, there is, of course, Mistosawassis, the Buffalo Child Stone, that was the marker between the southern plains and the northern plains. And the first time I saw this, I couldn't help but think about that presence of the marker of people and the being of the stone. And when you say in your story how she was gone, she was all gone, but there could still be this mark of a woman, I couldn't help but think about both the stone itself as being what you're pouring the beads over, but also the beads themselves as being, when assembled into a garment, themselves having a being. And I was just talking to Dylan Robinson on Friday, and he was talking about objects made by Indigenous peoples traditionally are beings. They are ancestors as well. These are not devoid materials. So for me, this piece was just so incredibly poignant, to imagine all of these different kinds of being and you speaking them into being as you're telling us this story.
Yeah. This video is actually made in two parts. The first part, where I'm pouring the beads onto the stone, is at Wanuskewin when I was the artist in residence, and I wanted to make a video. And so my poor daughter, I dragged her down, and I had a summer student help me pour all these beads onto the rock. These beads are what they call bead soup. They're just like leftovers. And then I had actually bought a pound of French yellow beads that were, they were terrible. So I threw them, put them in there, and we dropped them on the rock, and there's a creek that runs through there. And and it was just the sound of the birds, the ambient sound. And then when I came to do this project, I added the story to it because I felt the story belonged with the images.
Mm-hmm. And this is just one of your daughters, but this is quite theirs was pretty special too.
Yes.
Yes. I know we're getting very close to the end, but I also think it's worth talking about how when you put these beads in place, you worked with another young woman.
Yes, I worked with Aurora Wolf, who I met actually when I was at Saskatchewan. She would come out and bead with me, and we'd talk about all kinds of things. But yeah, she helped me put the blue beads underneath the this mattress or springs that she actually found at her farm and brought up for us to use.
Yeah, I just think that that you've been making such a persistent connection to so many different emerging artists, and that often happens through your beading practice. And now Aurora works with us at the galleries, and the fact that she was able to participate in this too, I think is another part of your legacy that's really worthy of consideration. So perhaps it makes sense that we stop here, or the last images are these. And if anyone can't recognize them, this is, of course, COVID-19. And pardon me?
I just saying these are my brains for the last one.
Yeah. So COVID-19 is the virus that we're all currently addressing in various different ways, and why we actually get to speak to everybody across the country is because we're doing this live on camera the way we likely would not had it not been for this strange disease. But I realize that I can't stop without looking at your brain scans, because so much of your work has been about the social conditions that have resulted in illness and abuses of Indigenous people, disadvantages, unevenness. And we talk a lot about the feasting of trauma, by white people feast on the trauma of Indigenous people. And your work has this, because of the push-pull of your beauty and refusal, and this persistence in maintaining these skill sets that you're passing on to so many people, particularly young women, though not only. We talked then about really being able to materialize what that trauma was. And this final work of group of works is your latest works. Do you want to just speak to that a little bit?
This is my latest work then, and I'm really excited about it. I wanted to talk about mental health, but I've been wanting to talk about that for about 5 years, but I couldn't find a visual to work with it. And then I discovered MRI, brain scans, and how you can look inside the brain and see what's going on. So then I was like, okay, I want to do these. I want them to look like MRIs. I want them to glow in the dark, because what I imagine happens in our brain is they talk about neurons and things moving and sparking. And so I imagine all this colorful stuff is going on in our head. So I actually had to wait for glow-in-the-dark beads to be invented. And then I found some, and then I was like, yay! I just started beading. So this one is PTSD, which they figure most Indigenous people have PTSD, especially people who went through boarding school, which I would firmly believe. And what I love about the brain scans is there's a visual representation of what is happening in your brain. Because I know for Indigenous people, it's hard to understand when your child is depressed and you say, oh, cheer up, it's not that bad. Come on, whatever. And how if we get medication, people say to us, why are you on white man's medication? Well, you don't need that, but you do when you have a mental illness, because there's brain chemicals that are all out of whack and things are happening in your brain. And in my own family, I have a nephew who has schizophrenia. My daughter's bipolar. I suffer from depression. And so I often talk about mental health and how if you get some good medication, just stay on it. My daughter's had 2 manic episodes that put her in the hospital, and she's been on her meds. She found some really good meds that work really well. And she did her master's degree, and she's living in Toronto. She's making a living as a filmmaker. And I'm really proud of her for how far she's gone, because it's if you look after yourself and get the right medications, you can have a great life. Mental illness doesn't mean the end of your life.
No, it certainly doesn't, Ruth. And you made, in your practice, you've brought things into the sensorial realm that we can acknowledge them fully. And because of the way that you share them with us, it becomes an experience. Like this room is lit with black light. So when people go in there, there's already the off-putting, the kind of surprise of that experience. And in that space, there's also a story on the wall that is retold upstairs. And I think that kind of echoing of story that repeats again and again suggests both the traumas you're referring to, but also the legitimate ability to bring forward your making and your way of being as a legitimate form of resilience. And there you are, the beating queen herself. And this was when you were doing a residency with us at USask, but in the Department of Health. And I think this is something that all too often, well, people mythologize artists in instability or our abilities to move beyond the rational, and often are criticized for that. You've pointed to how this kind of making is restorative and transfers knowledge in really remarkable ways.
Yeah.
So I think we're supposed to ask if people have questions now. So I want to thank you very much, Ruth, for this part, and we'll see what happens next.
Okay.
Hello, I'm back.
Hi.
Hi, how are you? Thank you so much. It was wonderful. And I was thinking as you were talking how appropriate it is that we're hosting this conversation with you both on International Women's Day. So I think it's quite appropriate. And the work was wonderful. And your new work, Ruth, the brain scans, are so fascinating. And it just, I'm sorry that we can't get to Saskatoon to see your show.
Yeah.
We'll make sure this show gets elsewhere. Let's
good job. Very good job. Now, there are no questions in the chat. People should feel free to post them now because we do have a few more minutes if people want to ask any questions of Ruth and Jake. Everyone's saying wonderful thank you. So what we'll do is we're going to send you the chat comments after so you can see. But we have lots of participants. Over 60 people were on board and listening through for the last hour. So that's really great. And I think people from across the country and everyone is just saying how wonderful it was to hear both of you today. So thank you again so much. And I think maybe I should try a beating a little bit, just a little experimental beating exercise. But
well, we did a beat-in 2 weeks ago, Ruth, or early February, and Ruth was one of our guest beaters. And I'm a convert. I'll just tell you that.
Yeah. So you hosted that as part of the exhibition?
No, it was actually we have something called Indigenous Achievement Week, and for students, we do the galleries presented it with one of our programs, Indigenous Student Achievement Pathways, where we hosted 5 days of beat-ins, and Ruth was our first. As the beating queen, she started us off, but then we had Hannah Claus, Sherry Farrell-Rosette, of course, a germinal beater necessary, but we also had Mitch Case from Sault Ste. Marie and Aurora Wolf. So it was, again, intergenerational and multi-gendered. And
there is a question, Ruth, about the colors that you chose to use for the brain scans.
What I did was I love Google Images, so I actually used Google Images a lot. And I looked at the brain scans, and then I had to just kind of figure out what color beads I had and how they would work. And like there's black for areas of where there's no nothing going on in the brain, and then blue is kind of like duller color, and then all the way up to yellow. And so I kind of use that kind of a gradient.
And someone else has asked if there is a place online to watch the whole video.
Not yet. I might put it on my website, ruthcuthand.ca. Really easy. Well, it's been updated, so yeah, might go there, might not.
Okay.
Yeah. Ruth gave us special permission here, but someone's also asking about how to learn to bead your way. And I think you should tell them, Ruth, that you're a 2-needle beader.
Yeah, I'm a 2-needle beader.
There's different strategies, and there's kind of a 1-needle, 2-needle fight going on. Like the factions are quite strong, but Ruth has convinced me 2-needle is the way to go. And I have to say it. If you're an artistic beader, I think you use 2 needles.
Yeah, because you want it to be, the lines to be curvy. You need to do it with 2 needles. It's very hard to do it with 1.
And if you get to travel again, we're thinking of starting our beat-ins again. And we did do them online. So just so you know, and I think it's worth bringing up that Daphne, the first Indigenous artist-run center in Montreal, GGArts, has actually weekly beat-ins that you can find on Facebook if you have any interest.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So that's with Skawanati and Hannah Claus. I think Sherry often drops in on that. So, well, they are Jajage based. Many people across the country have been dropping in, and it's really a pretty amazing way to get at that process.
Well, I do think we now have reached our time. So again, I just want to say a huge thank you to both of you for being here today, and thank you, Ruth, for the work that you contributed to the Governor General's Awards exhibition, but also for the work and contributions you make every day, all the time. So thank you. Thank you for being the artist you are. And thank you, Jake, for having this wonderful, insightful conversation with Ruth today.
Always a pleasure to be with Ruth, and thank you for letting it happen. You guys have been just amazing at AGA, and we hope to see you in real life soon.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for attending. And please enjoy your International Women's Day. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.